Warning fam, spoilers ahead, so if you have not read The Constant Princess by Philippa Gregory or seen The Spanish Princess on Stars, you might not want to watch this video. So let's go. So I initially stumbled across the Spanish Princess show on Stars, and I was really excited to see it because I don't know what it is. For some reason this year I have been much more interested in learning about Catherine of Aragon. I have always been a huge Anne Boleyn fan. I previously did not know a whole lot about Catherine of Aragon. I mostly knew that she was older than Henry. I didn't realize that it was really only like a 6-year age difference until like this year. Somehow I just never really looked into it, I guess. But yeah, I also like didn't know much about Spanish history. Like, have not studied that since like grade school, probably. There's a lot of reasons that I actually am really fascinated by this woman in history. So let's get into it. First off, let me talk about the book first, and then we'll kind of talk about how, the show changed some things up. I will say, first off, from the bit of historical research that I've started doing on, like, the real story of Catherine of Aragon, I think the book is much more historically accurate in as many ways as it can be than the show. The show, I feel like the show definitely kind of did its own thing, but we'll get there. But yes, so the show is the reason that I got really excited about reading this particular book and why I decided to jump forward in my reread / full read through of Philippa Gregory's Plantagenet and Tudor novels. First off, again, spoilers ahead, but first off, this book goes over the life of Catherine before I personally really knew much about her. Like, I didn't know much about her until, like, really when Anne Boleyn comes into the story, and kind of just that, like, I knew the basics. I knew that she had married Prince Arthur first, and that he died really young into their marriage, that she claimed it was never consummated, and she ended up marrying Henry VIII. I thought all of that happened real quick. I thought that she just had, I knew she had had consistent miscarriages. I knew her only, like, living child that, like, lasted more than a year or two was obviously Mary. I knew the basics of their relationship, but this book really dives deep into her early life. So it literally starts with her as, like, a small child on the battlefield with her mother and father, in particular her mother. So that's another thing I didn't know, aside from, like, obviously knowing who Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain were, predominantly because of learning about Christopher Columbus in grade school in this country. That's most of what I remember of them historically. I knew that they were also, I believe, the ones who, like, started the Inquisition, but I, like, knew barely anything. Like I said, I'm not very up to speed on medieval Spanish history, but I really want to be now, because this really is, it was fascinating, some of the information in there. I didn't even realize that the Moors, or, Muslim people, like, had basically, like, ruled Spain. And apparently them and the Jews in medieval Spain used to get along great. I don't know. Don't quote me on any of this, because this is history that I still really need to research. But this is my point, is that this book talks about a lot of that stuff. She was the youngest princess of, or infanta of Spain, right? And so it was maybe said that she was her mother's favorite daughter, or at least that's how she sees herself in this book. Again, this is historical fiction. There's only so many things that we can actually pull from real history. And I do like how at the end of every one of Philippa Gregory's books, she has kind of a letter about the story that she just told and her reasoning for why she spun the tale the way she did. I really appreciate that, that she does that. So people who are like, Philippa Gregory is not super historically accurate. No, maybe not. But she also comes to her perspectives, honestly. And she does explain why she thinks the things that she does. So, and really, what historical fiction, like, how accurate can any of it be when you're writing from the perspective of someone who maybe you only have, like, letters that they wrote or something, you know? So, and then, like, you know, historical records or whatever. So, I digress. This book is probably now definitely moved up in the list of Philippa Gregory novels. But like I said, I really liked learning about the history. I also really appreciated how Philippa Gregory goes really deep into, I think she does a really good job in describing kind of how Isabel and Ferdinand came together and destroyed the Moorish Empire in Spain and created, you know, their own, essentially. She does it in this really interesting way of, like, you know, Catalina, this is what she was called in Spain before she came to England, it was Catherine, right? Catalina sees her mother as just, like, the favorite of God. She says that God and her mother's will are one and the same, and that even her father always respected and listened to her mother. And so it's really, she has this, like, almost through the entire book, through, like, you know, her entire youth, she has this perspective. There's whole sections in the book when she first marries Arthur that go over, like, he's always like, tell me a story, and she'll tell her stories from her childhood, which I really loved. I don't usually like stuff like that in novels, but I think it's because it was such new information for me, and it didn't feel like, you know, dumping or, you know, like sitting through a history lecture. Not that I have a problem with that, I would totally do that anyway, but it felt very, like, just, it was very interesting. And the way that she does it is, like, through this lens of, like, yes, my mother is right. Like, we need to conquer the Moors, and they're pagans and blah, blah, blah. And it's very, like, hateful. And it does come across as, like, straight up racism, not going to lie. And also, you know, she just, like, they pray to the wrong version of God, although she calls it just the wrong God in general. I guess maybe in medieval times they didn't see it as the same thing. I guess some still probably don't, but wow, I digress again. So, but she has this perspective, but at the same time, Philippa Gregory still makes it very clear, like, the Spanish conquer the Moors and then literally, like, take all of their stuff, like their castles, their riches, their medicines. There's a whole lot in here about, like, the Moorish science, how advanced they were, and about, like, she talks a little bit about, like, the Spanish Jews and, like, all of their contributions to what the culture had previously been before the Spanish conquered these people and, like, basically started kicking them out or persecuting them as heretics and putting them through the Inquisition and all of this. She talks about how, like, you know, they were, like, the most feared and respected royalty in all of Europe at the time, especially, like, by, like, the Pope and the Catholic Church, because of all this persecution they were doing. And it's just such a contrast, and that's one of the things that I really liked about this too, is that in the course of the story, you really see Catalina learn from, like, one of her biggest character arcs in the story is her having this epiphany that, like, wow, my mom was not always right, and the Moors are not these evil people. Like, maybe they do pray to the wrong God, maybe they are infidels. Oh, that's the word she uses a lot here. Maybe they are infidels, but they have all this intelligence and this understanding of medicine and the human body, because the Moors were willing to actually look at human bodies that were dead and, like, study them, and you know, very advanced stuff for this time period, but it was considered, like, evil. It was like, why would you do that? But that's, like, that's how they got their knowledge, obviously, right? She has this whole realization through, you know, she has this particular experience, like the first time she gets pregnant, where she loses the baby, but then, and I don't know the actual medical whatever happened. I know that historically this did seem to happen, but they thought she was still pregnant. They thought she was pregnant with twins and that she'd only lost one baby. Now, I'm not a doctor, but that sounds kind of sketch to me too. Like, I don't know, but she even thinks it sounds questionable. Everyone does, but Henry's like primary like royal physician in the court is like, oh no, like you're, because they always got to stroke the king's ego, whatever he wants to hear, right? And so it's this whole big deal. She has a Moorish doctor come in secretly and she talks to him, and he's kind of like, yeah, I mean, listen to your own body. Like, do you think that you're still with child? Blah, blah, blah. It's a whole thing. But through that experience, it really starts making her realize, like, why would God give these infidels this knowledge and medicine that he doesn't give his chosen people? And it kind of really starts getting her thinking. So yeah, it was really interesting because as flawed of a character as Catalina is, it's understandable because she was raised royalty. Like she was raised in this, not only in the royalty aspect of things, which you'd think would be bad enough at spoiling somebody from an early age, but also her parents having this opinion, especially her mother having this opinion of like, we are divinely guided. This is our divine birthright. We are favored by God, all of this. So she is very proud. And like normally I wouldn't really like that in a character. However, I also it's understandable. I find her understandable in the fact that she is also super flawed. And I think Philippa Gregory does a really good job of showing how flawed she is. Most of the book is from Catalina's perspective, but periodically she'll jump to someone else's head, whether it's Arthur's head or Henry VII's head or Henry VIII later on. She will jump around sometimes just to give you some other perspectives, but it doesn't feel confusing at all. Also throughout the book, there's like the storytelling side of it, and then like there'll be like moments where, she's either praying or like writing letters or something, or it almost reads like a journal entry. That's like directly in her mind. And I really loved the whole writing style of this, just period. I think Philippa Gregory did an amazing job. The climax of the book is really her leading the battle, going out and winning the Battle of Flodden. Flodden? I might be saying it wrong. I think it's Flodden. While Henry VIII is in France. And she doesn't actually go into battle herself, but she does lead the troops out, and she's on the battlefield, which is historically accurate. That is what she did. She didn't actually fight in the battle, but she felt like she needed to do this. This is what she grew up, literally from the age of 6. She grew up watching her mother ride out into battle and just be praying and just have complete faith that what they were doing was right and that they were supported by God. And I mean, she seemingly got proved right in the fact that they did eventually conquer the Moors and then take over the, the Alhambra Palace. Another place I didn't even know existed, but the descriptions of it in this, like Philippa Gregory actually went there while writing this book, and it was absolutely, like, just the descriptions, I just like literally almost said it was absolutely beautiful, like I'd actually been there, but that's how I felt reading it. It was just, it sounds incredible. I want to go so bad after reading this. Let me get to the main point that I'm trying to make, so I can compare a little bit with the show, right? So a couple main points in this book. It is proposed that Catalina and Arthur did eventually fall in love. They were only married for like, I think 5 or 6 months. I don't even think 6 months before he died. And they don't start off falling in love, but they do, according to this version, they do fall in love, and they have this plan to create, to create Camelot again, right? He's Prince Arthur, and they have all these plans that they make about how they want to rule. And it sounds, for the most part, a lot of the ideas are really good. They want more education. They want to take care of their people better. Obviously, she is very religiously motivated because of all the stuff we were just talking about, how she was raised and everything. So that might not have gone so well. But for the most part, like, they have all these plans. They're in love, and it's really romantic and very sweet, very young love kind of vibes, which normally isn't my thing, but, you know, obviously I kept reading because I know enough about history to know, like, what was coming, and it was really interesting, so much to the point that I actually, like, literally cried when I got to the part of Arthur dying. It was really sad. She spent so much time building their relationship, and it felt very, like, especially them being teenagers, of course they would have fallen in love. Like, what else were they supposed to do? There's, like, nobody else really around. They'd been betrothed since she was, like, 4 years old. So therein lies the one issue that I have with this version of events, is that because they do fall in love, because Catalina and Arthur do fall in love, when he realizes he's sick and he's not going to get better, which I think historically she got sick as well when he did, but she recovered and he didn't. That's left out of the book. Whatever, I can live with that. She recovered anyway, so it's fine. But when he is on his deathbed, the last time she sees him, basically his last wish right before he, like, dies is he's like, you still need to be Queen of England. You still need to make our dreams come true. You need to marry my brother. And she's like, well, that's a sin. I can't do that. And he's like, lie. He's like, tell the world that I couldn't consummate our marriage. Tell them I was impotent. And again, that's the one issue I have with this, is that, I guess it's a couple issues, but one, I don't care what kind of man it was back in the medieval times. I just literally have a really hard time wrapping my mind around any medieval man, especially a prince who was probably as spoiled as Prince Arthur was, given his parentage and all of this, that he would be like, yeah, tell the world I was impotent. Especially like a teenager, no, I don't think he would have done that, no matter how in love they were. Maybe that was like a feverish thing. I don't know. I don't know. I just find that really hard to swallow. The other aspect of that I find hard to swallow is that for her entire life, she would stick to this. She would go through the things she did, because it was like 7 years, 6 or 7 years in between Arthur dying and her finally getting to marry Henry VIII, like, and the amount, like, she was, like, basically living in poverty. Like, there's a whole lot there. I'm not going to get into all the history, but she was basically living in poverty the entire time, and there's the fact that she would go through all of that for someone that she literally was, like, in love with for maybe a couple of months, because it took them a couple months into their marriage to really start connecting. So her, like, first love, and I get it, like, first loves can be really intense and blah, blah, blah. And maybe, you know, part of it is, you know, she was raised thinking like that. I'm supposed to be Arthur's wife. I'm the Princess of Wales. I'm supposed to be Queen of England, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's what it is. But it was a little hard for me to swallow. That being said, I'm going to jump over real quick, because this video is getting a little long, but I'm going to jump over real quick and talk for a minute about The Spanish Princess, the show on Starz, because there were definitely some differences. Like I said, the show kind of seems to have done its own thing to some degree. Now, I did really love all of the actors in the show. I think they did an amazing job. Writing-wise, I'm not sure why I feel like they made a bad choice in a few ways. In that, as much as I really liked the show, it was really fun to watch. I think it is far more historically inaccurate than the book itself. A huge part of that is because, one, Henry VIII, when Catalina first meets him, even in the real history, he, like I said, is like 6 years younger than her. So I think he's like 10 or 11 when she first meets him, maybe even younger when she initially meets him, but somewhere around there. And it is described that he, like, seems to, like, have this, like, crush on her or whatever. But in the show, they make him, like, barely younger than Arthur. They also say in the show that he had been writing these secret letters to Catalina, and she'd been writing back, and they were these, like, love letters or whatever. And so that the true love story the whole time was really, like, them being a thing, and she does in the show sleep with Arthur eventually, and they do kind of have some feelings for each other, but it doesn't ever feel as intense as what it does in the book. And so her motive in both the book and the show ends up being very different. In the book, it's like I said, it's she made this deathbed promise to Arthur, and she just has to stick with it. That and her own personal convictions, right? In the show, it's very much her own it's really just like her own personal convictions, but she also like has been in love with Henry this entire time. And I feel like that's one thing I really liked more about the book, is that because her true love, even by the end of the book, it jumps forward in time after the Battle of Flodden, several years into when Henry is trying to discard her in the court trial that she's like famous for walking out on after she makes her little plea to him. Even in that mindset, like by the end, she's still like, I am the Queen of England, Arthur's my true love kind of thing, my true husband, whatever. And that makes her feel much more, it doesn't feel as sad and heartbreaking in a way. It feels, it does, but it feels more like she still won her point, right? Whereas in the show, it feels just so devastating because she was actually shown as being in love with Henry, and not just having done this, like doing this deathbed duty kind of thing. So it feels much more like when he just throws her away like trash after their like 16-year marriage. And I mean, if he actually did kind of have a crush on her, I mean, she was this like exotic beauty when she first came to court. Like even Henry VII creeped on her in both the show and the book. I will say that was the most unpleasant part of the book for me, was the little period of time where Henry VII is like creeping on her, and like he does try to marry her at some point. They show that a little in the show, but they really tone it down, which is one thing I actually appreciated more about the show, because it was really disgusting in the book. This like 40-something-year-old man that's like got a boner for this like 16-year-old girl, 15, 16, when she first gets to court. It's just, and the way that it was written was just like, oh, it was terrible. It was just like really disgusting to read. But yeah, so like those were like that's really the main differences in the book and the show, and that's why also like the show is, I feel like, less historically accurate in those certain ways. That being said, if you liked the show, I would absolutely recommend reading this book. I will probably do more kind of comparing and contrasting, specifically having to do with the Spanish Princess later on, because if you've seen the show, they say that it's based on both the Constant Princess and the King's Curse, which is Margaret Pole's story. I have not read this one yet. It is on my TBR. One thing that they didn't really mention, and maybe they just don't want to be like it's based on 3 books, but it is a little bit, is that the show also focuses a lot on Margaret Tudor, Henry's oldest sister. And her story is 3 sisters, 3 queens. It's a little, I think, mistitled. I've already started reading this one. I'm not liking it. But we'll get into that when I talk about it. These are both really thick books, so we'll see, but I might just make separate videos for both of them. I don't know. But I definitely want to talk about them and how they relate to the show, because that's literally why I'm reading both of these as well right now, as big of books as they are. This one is mistitled because it gives the impression that it is written from the perspective of Margaret, Catalina, and Mary, the youngest Tudor sister of Henry VIII. It's not. It's pretty much just Margaret Tudor's story, and she's the sister who goes off and marries the Scottish king. I think it's James the IV. I don't think it's the 5th. I think it's the 4th. I could be wrong. Can't remember. Quick little spoiler on this. The reason I'm not enjoying it is because Margaret Tudor is described, the way, or not described, but the way that she's portrayed in this is just like this very spoiled little brat. Yeah, Margaret's story is in the show as well. It's not the main focus of the Spanish Princess. Maybe that's why they just didn't include that this book is a part of it. Maybe it's because this book is just not good. It's a very thick book, And so far, as far through it as I am, like, Margaret is still kind of just, it's like she doesn't seem to be growing up. I'm really hoping that she will. I have so much more historical research that I want to look into now, and this story, Catherine of Aragon, is the reason behind that. I'm fascinated with her now. She's definitely become one of my favorite of Henry VIII's wives. In my exploration of all of his wives and their different personalities and stories and whatever. So yeah, those are the majority of my thoughts regarding both show and book. How did you feel about them? Have you read the book? Have you watched the show? I would assume you're at least thinking about it if you're watching this video, so what are your thoughts? I would definitely love to hear about it. Anyway, please comment below. If you haven't already, like, share, subscribe. I'll have more videos up very soon. I typically try to post at least once a week. I aim for Wednesdays, but I'm not gonna lie, sometimes the date moves around because I'm a busy bee. But you will always get minimum 1 video a week, hopefully 2 when I have time. See y'all very soon. Happy reading!